case is
Para
life
agregar con eso,
itself.
hermana, es que
Another
antes
thing
de
that I would
George
like to
Floyd
add to
estaba
what you have
Ahmaud
said,
Arbery,
before George
después de
Floyd, we
George
have
Floyd
Armor Arbery
estaba Richard
and
Brooks.
also Richard
Y,
Bruce before
entre eso
George
estaba
Floyd,
Javier
and
Ambler,
also Javier
que es
Ambler,
descendencia
who
panameña.
is also from
So, George
a
Floyd, yo
Panamanian
creo
descent.
que
On
el
George
asesinato
Floyd,
de George Floyd lo que
what can I
hizo
tell? Well,
es
I think that
visualmente
the
nos
killing of
acercó
George Floyd
a la
made us
energía del odio,
aware visually
el odio que
of
cae,
the
alguien lleva para
hatred that
poner su
someone has
rodilla
inside of
encima
himself,
del
to
cuello de
put his
alguien con su
knee
mano en su
on the
bolsillo,
neck
como si él
on
estaba homo.
somebody. And
Y yo creo
it's
que eso
appalling. And
visualmente
this
nos afectó
visually
porque
has
como
affected
personas
us a
negras,
great deal
donde sea
because,
que
as
estamos,
part of the
yo
black
como
community,
panameña, pero
wherever we
viviendo en
might
Estados
be,
Unidos,
I
tú
live
como
in the
panameña y viviendo
US,
en
I'm
Estados
from
Unidos,
Panama,
lo
but
sentimos en los dos
you
lugares,
are
pero lo
from
sentimos
here,
más
from the
solo por
US,
ser
living here,
negras,
but we feel
you know,
um,
porque lo
we
que eso
feel concerned. We are all concerned by what is happening. This was something physical that we saw, but psychologically and emotionally, we feel that there is someone pressing our neck with a knee. Whenever the pandemic started, and well, afterwards, pandemic was particularly hitting the black and brown community. And these two incidents, as someone said, has put us for the first time and on the same page because the whole world is having the same conversation on the police brutality. They are hitting black and brown community, transgender community, and we can see how the system has failed to address the issues of the black communities in terms of health, education. So today what we're seeing is just the manifestation of a change, a general world change. And people now realize that our lives matter, that they can no longer ignore us. They are not only going to ask or for forgiveness. What we want now is to see how things are going to change, how the system is going to change. Otherwise, we will be in this struggle for many months to come. Yes, and I think it is also important to say that this is a system, this is a structured racist system that we're dealing with. But we we need to tackle also the monitoring system, the police monitoring system, and this also entails the issue with jails, police structure. That structure was created to monitor and to control slaves, so to speak, to protect the economic investment of the owners of people who have been illegally enslaved. So this is what the police structure is about. And this is how it was created. And we have been, so to speak, moving forward as a society, but the police still are having the same approach, which is protecting white people who were the owners of slaves in order to make sure that they will always be safe. So this is the reason why these public policies have been created. They are not working to benefit all communities. So the police system is just that, is a fraud, a rigged system that has been created to protect the capitalist interests, to protect the white people interests. And this is what we had to make the public aware of. And when you start meddling with that systems, you can obtain other changes. But now the police elite is understanding that there is no more, we're not compromising anymore. It's not that I am going to be satisfied with whatever you're going to offer to me. That's over. This is not what we want now. The people want more. People are demanding that their needs be satisfied. Otherwise, we are going to take to the streets. And we also need to to bear in mind that this is just not about the United States or the black and brown community. This is about the world, because this is the issues we need to be addressing in our communities. Where are the Panamanian communities? And they are still being ignored. The thing is to understand that the black communities are being systematically ignored all over the world. This is not just about the US and just about George Floyd, but there have been other cases, similar cases in Brazil of police brutality. We need to be aware also of the cases that are going on in Colombia right now. So what does it mean? It means that the whole society needs to face its racism history, and we need to go back to those issues, to those discussions. These issues need to be addressed by, for example, the Rastafari community. I'm very proud of being here as member of the Rastafari Alliance in Panama. So we have to go back. We have to go back in order to look to the future. What do we need to understand from our past, from our Africa, of the fact that we are Afro descendants, in order to face this? Because we're not just going to sit and wait until they let us in or that they integrate us. We need to create for ourselves. So we have been fighting, we have been working on the resistance culture. We have been resorting to many tools in order to survive. So we do not need to wait for anybody. But the thing is that we have to go beyond borders, to leave aside the fact that we speak English, French, or Spanish. We are all African descendant. We are all Africans, and this is what we need to understand in order to address our situation properly. Because this has been going on for more than 400 years. They have been attacking us, they have been ignoring us, they have been abusing us, killing us, and now it's time for change. Okay. So let's go on. I also wanted to say that in all these processes, we need to have a clear understanding of the fact that what we are facing as Black African descendant women is not playing a central role in our movement. We are pretty vulnerable to the state of violence. If we look at the figures in jails, we see this kind of violence, and also physical and emotional violence on the hands of men and the state. So I think that we need to focus more on these issues, because when we talk about structural changes against racism, we need to have an open dialogue on the impact this is going to have on the African descendant women and the transgender African descendant communities, because the marginalization against this cannot be accepted. And if we do not voice this, and if we do not put the Afro descendant women into the center, then of this discussion is like we were accepting that situation. We are mothers, we are kid protectors, Afro kid protectors. This has to be given the highest priority, and this is not something that we cannot deal with afterwards. So a message that we want to get across people who are listening to us right now is how, as Afro women descendants, how we are dealing with this, and not only in the US but regionally. When you look at poverty in certain communities, and how women have to support their families and to make a living. So who is taking care also of the elderly? This is not being addressed in the whole discussion of human rights for Afro descendant communities and Black and brown communities. Yeah, well, you're just talking about reparations. It's time for reparations. So the whole conversation leads us to reparations, justice, in order to repair the damage that has been inflicted on us. The system cannot continue going like this. They cannot ignore us anymore. The fact that women are not at the center of the discussion, because we have to see what is going to come after George Floyd's killing. They killed Ahmaud Arbery and others. So, what after all these struggle? I mean, after all this struggle, we will have to deal with the women issues. Women who also face other types of exclusion and racism because they have not been listening to women. In the end, are also the leaders and the speak persons of those cases of violence against women. So this is something that we need to focus on. We need to have very open discussions on equality, and don't invite us just because you want to see a feminine face in your panel. No, we need to make sure that there is going to be equality, gender equality, because we have so many things that we want to voice out. Yes, that's right. So, on the big campaign in the U.S. is a campaign called to de-invest in police forces, and I would like to say something about that. I'd like to explain a little bit more of this. These campaigns that are very important. This campaign needs to go beyond the U.S. Borders. We have to change the approach, and we also have to address the military system that is invading other countries, and the empire is also attacking other countries, and this has repercussions on also the black American descendants. If we say we're going to de-invest in the police forces in the United States, that is not enough. We have to go beyond that. We have to de-invest in the military system that is continuing, that has been killing people abroad, that are taking away their lands in Latin America and in Africa. We need to de-invest also in the killings that are occurring in the villages because and the peoples because of the the militarization. We need to de-invest in all the vessels that want to invade Venezuela. So we need to de-invest also in the way in which the land problem in Brazil is being handled, because they are supporting a racist president in Brazil, just like the one we have in the U.S. I hope that since the people's the people is are asking to de-invest in a racial system that prevails here, that need also to take into consideration all the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean who have been supporting the Afro population here. Because you need to know that in those countries in Latin America and in Africa, people are dying because the imperialistic policies by the U.S. And now all this is intertwined. And through the Afro Resistance, the organization in which I've been working, we want to push for that, to enlarge that definition on de-investment so that the Afro peoples in other countries can also be visualized in the processes of all our campaigns. Callie is also with us, right? I've just been told that Callie Akuno is with us. Are you there?
How are we seeing now, a month after George Ford's assassination? How are we seeing the situation, and specifically around the human rights issue?
Well, good morning to everybody. Pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed the conversation that you two had. It's been a while, really trying to catch up and practice Spanish. Where I'm at in Mississippi, I just don't get that much of an opportunity. So a lot of brain power was being used, and parts I haven't touched on it in quite some time. So I really enjoyed that, and I think this is a timely conversation. I'm glad it's being had on so many different levels, and that there's a real bridge in some of the divides that are occurring amongst Afro-descended peoples on the basis of language. This is something that I know in our arena we've been particularly fighting, particularly some trends that have been very narrow in the United States around including folks in broader conversations around racial justice and reparations, which you had just brought up. That's why I think, in the broader context, we have more time to just explain why that's important and why there's some kind of tendencies within our movement, which I think are reflecting a very kind of a nationalist, racial essentialist notion, very much fixated just on issues amongst people of African descent in the United States in a very kind of myopic way, which I think misses the boat around the global nature of our people's struggle and fight, and it's been that way, unfortunately, since the advent of the slave trade. So we have to put all these different things in, I think, a broader context, and this is one way of doing that. But a month into the situation here in the United States, people should be, I think, very much aware, at least from my perspective, that the conversation, the dialogue in the society has moved, I think, in a very radical way. If you were to bring up prison abolition, the abolition of the police, if you were to try to introduce that as a core just subject of discussion, even a month ago, you would have been laughed, out of any political conversation, particularly a mainstream conversation. And now, as a result of all of the mass activity that has happened in the past month, not only are these critical conversations that are being had in the mainstream, but there is active kind of initiatives and campaigns to defund the police, take them out of schools, take them out of communities that are happening all throughout the United States. Now, it's uneven. We've had some victories, we've had some defeats, but all in all, I think it's a major advance, and one that I don't think is going to go away too quickly. I think this movement and this kind of transformation of consciousness, not only amongst people of African descent, but I think in the broader society, whether one is for or against our human rights, at the very least, the question has been put front and center in the United States in a way that it hasn't, I would argue, probably since the 1960s, early 1970s. So this is a critical advance. To the degree that it's going to kind of advance the enforcement and the protection and the respect of the human rights of people of African descent in the United States, I think remains to be seen. And I say that because there's a long history in this country of Black revolt, Black rebellion, Black social advance that's then just engenders kind of a very vicious, often historically, counter mobilization amongst white folks within the United States, using just our language in idiom. And we see some of that already in motion. There's vigilante violence, which is beginning to occur, I would argue, on a massive scale throughout the United States, not just localized in the South, but throughout the United States. And then there's the political response, which is trying to, from kind of a liberal perspective, narrow down the demands so that they kind of continue to protect the advance of kind of the capitalist social order and the ongoing exploitation of people, Black and otherwise. And then there's the just out and out kind of ultra conservative position, which is very much fixated on property relations, keeping us in poor working conditions, ununionized, not secured by any fundamental right to health care and access. One of the things that's remarkable in this whole situation over the past, I would say 3 or 4 months, even before the assassination of George Floyd kind of changed the dynamic, was the just total lack of regard for the people of African descent in this country, expressed by how we were being treated in the midst of this pandemic. And I mean by being treated, I mean the denial in many cases of health care, proper health care access, folks being, Black and Latino folks being the primary folks who are doing the quote unquote essential work under very adverse conditions, and often for super exploitative wages with no protection. And this is continuing to be kind of practiced as they're opening up the economy, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But they're doing so at the expense of our lives. This is the thing I want the international audience, whoever's listening, to understand, that they are treating our folks as if we are utterly disposable, and putting the economy, which means their profits. Let's be clear what that means: putting their profits before our life, and it's primarily, Black people, Latino people, Indigenous people who are bearing the brunt of this. And I would argue that was one of the kind of the key catalysts behind this energy and this rebellion, and it's rooted in the very systemic denial of our fundamental human rights, but particularly our economic, social, and cultural rights to adequate health care, adequate education, access to clean water, which is a major problem in a lot of our communities, and denial of the access to proper health care. These are things that was going to be an ongoing struggle in this country. I think folks are now in it for the long haul as a result of particularly this younger generation. I don't see them compromising that much. I think they're very much rooted in a politics and a dynamic of challenging everything, which is a good
everything.
So I see this being kind of a longer, protracted struggle. Whether we get some immediate kind of gratification and protection of our human rights, I think in the short term, unfortunately, on the national level, the answer probably will be no. But on the local level, these fights are advancing and advancing fast. And that's going to create some very unique conditions in the future that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah. Thank you so much, my brother. Good to hear you. Know that you're doing some amazing work. Genevieve, we're going to close out. So, Genevieve, I don't know if you want to, si quieres decir unas cuantas palabras para terminar, and then Kali, if you want to say also some closing words, and then and I'll close it out. Genevieve? No te oigo.
Sorry. So I'll speak in English at this point. I think to close out, we have to, one, what Kali said about their reopening and disposing of us pretty much, right? I think that also happens in the region. I think it's happening now. We see more and more of Brazil, for example, that is blatantly lying about how many people are dying of this. And at the same time, police brutality over there has been on steady increase, and indigenous people have been dying more and more as well because of state neglect in regards to their fundamental right to health, for example. And I think, just to close out, I think there's also shifts that are happening, right? I've been in conversations with folks in Colombia, for example, that the aspect that here around police accountability, right, and department accountability, like the police department and the actual police enforcers here, doesn't happen for the most part in Latin America. It's just a blanket statement against the police, but not an accountability. And those things are shifting now because the people that have been impacted by police brutality are saying, but wait a minute, it's not just like this happens and it's a state. We have to hold each officer accountable to this, right? So there's also this conversation now that is moving from just state violence that includes the police, but no, let's look at the actual things that enabled for these things to happen as linked to the displacement from our land, right? So I think those are important things to also center. And I'm always going to bring up gender because folks don't bring it up. And most of these panels, you know, it's only one, maybe two people that center Black women and our trans siblings right now in the conversations. And at the end of the day, yes, Black men are dying, absolutely. And we're paying for it with our bodies. The amount of domestic violence that we are facing, that, you know, there is a young woman that got lighter fluid thrown on her face. I can't remember in what city. You know, those are things that where are the brothers there? Where are the men like upholding these issues against us, right? So we have to really start looking at gender within the movement and centering that the fight has to include Black women, and we all have to stand up for Black women, because I feel like there's more women standing up for Black women, but we stand up for everybody.
Yeah. Brother Kali, do you want to give a few short words to close out?
Well, I agree with everything that Genevieve, laid out. One of the things, in a broad sense, that I don't think is being recorded enough, when we particularly look at the link between this and the pandemic, are the number of Black women, in particular, who are being sacrificed in a lot of these frontline roles and positions. There's nurses, but also in the service industry. Here in Mississippi, you know, the original trend, just so folks know, I think the original trend was that it was killing more men than it was women overall. And they were arguing that was for kind of underlying health conditions. And then I know when they got here in Mississippi, that was quickly disproved. Here in Mississippi, because of where folks are situated and because of the care work, because of the service work, that's been very genderized in our society, but particularly here in a lot of fundamental ways. It's a disproportionate number of Black women, and that's just not being discussed. I haven't seen that discussed anywhere on a national level, and it's hardly going to come up on a local level. And then the nature of we need to be specific, I think, about just talking about the violence inside of the movement itself. You know, the young woman who lost her life in Florida, you know,
Florida.
it's hardly mentioned. And there's been two other cases that have been brought up, and there's hardly any dialogue about that. And it seems to be like a touchy subject, but it's one we're going to have to tackle because it's going to really hurt us in the end if we don't kind of deal with the internal contradictions within our movements and within our cultures. So I think that's a critical piece. The other thing that I would just caution is, you know, I don't think we can continue. I don't think we need to learn how better, but I don't think we can continue to just kind of define this as a U.S. problem.
No.
And I think both of you spoke to that. I just wanted to reinforce that in English. You know, the atrocities happening in Brazil alone, I think, merit global attention. I would argue, unfortunately, just given the nature of how white supremacy is playing itself out in Brazil, that it's going to catch up and maybe even surpass at the end of the day, both in the level of just extrajudicial killing, which is ramping up, that Genevieve spoke to, but also just the fatalities from COVID-19 and all the different things related to it. Because it's not just one thing. Like, this is an international problem that people of African descent are facing, because this is also spreading in the Caribbean. I mean, just all over, just what's going on in Montreal North, which is primarily people of Haitian descent who live, you know, in that community. Everywhere we look, even in Europe, we are finding these same patterns, and we have to figure out both how to present it, analyze it, and then move on it, both in an international and a Pan-Africanist context. That's the last thing that I would really stress. Our problem is global, and our response has to be global.
Yeah, this is, I mean,
Thank you.
like I said earlier, in Spanish, it's the first time globally that we're all having the same conversation from wherever we are standing. And what I hope is that we now see each other, that we are now better at seeing ourselves in all these spaces, and really figuring out how to connect better, build better, and get stronger as a community, no matter, like I said in Spanish, no matter what language we speak. And you know, one of the things for me and Genevieve in our spaces is that it's a conversation about the US and the African descendant community. It's a conversation about Latin America and the African descendant community, and that it's not an other conversation. When you talk about the Latino community here in the US, it's not an other conversation. You know, I am calling out Latinos that if you are standing in the streets and you are saying Black Lives Matter, then self-identify yourself in your Blackness, and also start calling out the internal racism that exists in the community, because that's part of this conversation also. If you don't see us within the community of people of African descent, then you cannot be seeing the impact that we are seeing on George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. So all of this is requiring everyone to change their narrative. We need a new narrative and we need a new shift. So thank you both, for you know, Baba Diogenes fell off, so it was great to just have this short chat with you both,
No.
and keep up doing the great work that you're doing.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.